This podcast is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Get Microsoft software for 25% off with offer code Broken Silicon, and then also use offer code Broken Silicon to get 6% off at Silver Knight PCs. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and my guest is someone who's coming on the show, I believe, for the third time. So anyone who's been around the channel for a while now will undoubtedly recognize you. There were a few people when I announced you were coming on again that were incredibly excited, and I really do think you give really insightful advice and ideas and input on the things going on in gaming hardware. But for those who haven't listened to those episodes yet, and I recommend you all go back and listen to them, to be fair, please, who are you? What's your work history? And I do say that because it is quite extensive, actually. And what do you do now?
Yeah, thanks. So now I'm just about to start a brand new gig. I'm going to work in marketing at MIPS, the processor IP company. They build compute IP for custom silicon enablement in automotive, data center, embedded systems. It's a old brand name that's been around a long time. Started off with the first round of RISC and now moving to RISC-V. They're really leaning into the big ecosystem growth that you see with all the augmented use cases for AI and purpose-built chips that need specific performance in specific types of applications. But I'm going to them after spending a few years at NXP. I was part of the product management team on the advanced edge processor innovation, looking at applications, processors that run Linux, Android, that kind of stuff in multiple embedded use cases from automotive to industrial to IoT. A lot of different things there. Before that, I was with Sci5, working on marketing and messaging and driving the media and analyst strategy, product launches. And ahead of that, the reason how we came to know each other is my work at AMD. I was in the client computing team from 2013 to 2019. So I was part of the team that helped define and launch Ryzen. I was a product manager for Threadripper. I did a lot of business development for desktop processors, helped to define and launch the AM4 platform, the STR4 platform, working with a lot of those ecosystem partners, the motherboard guys, the storage, memory, power supply, cooling, all of those guys to get that going and to bring Ryzen to the market. So that's it. And that's the last decade of my life in a nutshell.
I think I ask you this every time you come on, but I feel like could be a different answer every time, so that's why I do. I mean, how do you see Ryzen now? I mean, it's been a while now since you've worked at AMD. You left in 2019, was it? Or is it 17?
Yeah, that's right. 19.
So you must have been, I mean, that's the Zen 2 launch. You must have been feeling very confident about the company then. But has the confidence grown? I mean, how do you see AMD now?
Yeah, in my view, they're executing immensely well. I see a lot of innovations in the technology. Big fan of the 3D V-Cache and a lot of the technologies they're bringing in. On the technology side, the architectures, I'm a real big fan. There's some spots that need work. They've got a daunting task in front of them as they chase Nvidia, but I don't think it's any more daunting from the starting place that we were trying to chase down Intel. So whether AMD are going to get the win handed to them by Nvidia failing like Intel have, I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be a pure race to excellence, which is the best thing for the market. But I'm really proud of what all of our former colleagues have done. They've done some amazing work. They continue to do so. They seem to be continuing to keep the ethos of building great products and doing it in a way that encourages everyone to want to work with them and find reasons to do things together versus a more combative approach some of their competitors take.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought because all the time I'll hear on earnings calls or just pundits online or on TV, NVIDIA's so dominant, AMD, they should grow. There's no way they could catch them. But you would compare catching NVIDIA right now in AI, you would say that really isn't any harder than catching Intel and CPU, or do you think it is harder? Just to clarify.
Yeah, great way to phrase that question. I think it's harder. I think it's
Okay.
harder because of the lack of commonality in the ecosystem for software, right? When it was x86 versus x86, back when we had FX processors, that's when I first joined. I was trying to, work with the media, do product reviews on FX, launch that, the 8370, etc. If an Intel core was worth 100, then an AMD core was worth 10, right? So you had that huge disparity. I don't think that AMD are that far back in AI, but
Right.
the software really reframes that conversation because there are, when you think about programming on x86, there were ninjas that could make those machines do anything they wanted. And they did. And they were in gaming and in high-end applications. And that was why you saw huge disparities in performance between Intel and AMD, because it was so tuned for one architecture. This is the case today for NVIDIA architecture and AI models, because everybody's, NVIDIA had the vision or the strategy to say, let's seed the market, go make everybody use our architecture, make it as easy as possible. And then really foundationally, everybody builds on that. All the models are built on NVIDIA. So it's easiest to run on NVIDIA as you continue to iterate. And that investment is what AMD has to catch up with, not just the hardware, making a great product that runs NVIDIA models, but also the software packs, how to go deploy something like an augmented voice command module or something, voice to intent, voice controlled translation, something like that. Those are software packs. If you look at what NVIDIA talk about at GTC and other things, the Omniverse, as they grandly call it, they're really telling you, like, here's my solution accelerator for you to layer on top with as a software as a service powered by AI, go build something great. It's really no different than saying, hey, here's my CPU, and you get LLM and other compilers and libraries to make your stuff go fast. Just tune and optimize for your model. Just now it's all fully branded and it's got the buzzword of AI around it, so it feels special and new and different. But this is the same old way we've ever seen acceleration work, like DirectX or Vulkan and things like that. So they've got a bigger task ahead because how fast the iterations are. The models are evolving incredibly rapidly and they're stacking on top of each other. And you just got to get on the treadmill and start going.
Right. So it's not so much that like Intel, especially in like the bulldoze, really pile driver versus Intel days, didn't look as bleak or like as big of a mountain to climb as Nvidia. It's just Nvidia's, to mix metaphors, a smarter, more entrenched mountain, right? And that's what makes it harder.
Yeah, they definitely took they learned the lesson from Intel. Intel taught everybody a lesson in how to hold your market share and build the walled garden. And everyone is taking that now to the next level. So NVIDIA have definitely built the moat. And now you've got to cross it with their permission, or you have to just build a bridge. And bridge building when the other side doesn't want you to is really hard. So you've just got to find ways to work around that or work with that. So it's I think because AMD is more of a collaborative company, that they will find a way to get the other endpoint anchored so they can build a bridge. Will it be as big and as wide as enough to ship everything across? Probably not. But that's the game they've got to play. Right, they can't force it, and NVIDIA won't let them force it. But they're taking a different strategy, I think, in terms of building with customers. Like if they show up and say this is a mutual benefit. Great example is the recent announcement of Microsoft with the custom epics with the NVIDIA IP and the AMD IP together. Right there's your answer of how can they catch up by working together, because the customer is big enough to say we're going to work together. This is how it goes.
Now, this question here might come a bit out of left field, but there's been rumors that, and I've heard this to a certain degree from people I've talked to as well in retail, that the Blackwell laptops coming out, in a couple months, are mostly being paired with Raptor Lake, not Arrow Lake, because OEMs don't really want to use Arrow Lake. We'll get to that, I'm sure, eventually. But it's interesting because you would think if you were NVIDIA, well, why would we not pair, an RTX 5070 with Strix or I mean, honestly, above Raptor, like even Hawkpoint, or Fire Range or all these other AMD parts. But there's a part of me that, and I think it's kind of stating the obvious. Well, Nvidia wants to keep Intel in a certain position in laptop, because if AMD were to get an entrenched position in laptop, AMD could cut them out. Do you think that's possibly true? Because Ice Lake versus Zen Plus, pick your poison. They're both pretty good. But right now, it feels like Nvidia is deliberately trying to partner with Intel when it's getting a little long in the tooth in laptop. Do you think that's possible, or how do you see that?
I'd flip it. Intel are pushing incredibly hard to maintain that market share. They're, as a metaphor, I'd say when you buy Raptor Lake from them, it comes protected from shipping, wrapped in dollar bills, right? So they are pay to play. They want to keep that cash cow. They want to keep the perception of leadership. They want to keep the perception of OEM wins. There's a lot of inertia there, right? All these OEMs know how to work with Intel really, really well. So they have the technical contacts. It's really hard to take a team and just say, all right, everybody's now working with a complete different set of contacts in a new, different way. Those platforms, they never come out, raising it to the next level. It's always sideways or always behind, despite the underlying technology. There's niggles, there's things that you didn't know, there's stuff where people goes, well, I thought you knew that to do that. And well, that we put that in the errata. You didn't read that, right? All of that kind of stuff, that way of working together takes time to develop. And you'd say, well, hasn't it been years since AMD entered the market on this? But it really has only been like 3 laptop CPU generations, right? We're still really early. It takes a long time to move over. There's so much heritage. And these leaders at these companies work together to preserve and maintain their targets, their goals. They have responsibilities. And if they can maintain the cost of goods, right? Even, because when you think of, these OEM laptops, are they the fastest platforms in the world? They're not, right? They're just the most available. They're maybe the best supported, because you can find someone to talk to anywhere. Everyone knows how to use them. They've got brand recognition. They've got trust. They're, no one builds an enterprise, small business and buys Dell laptops or HP laptops or Lenovo laptops and gets fired for it, right? But if you go to the local white box OEM guy and pick, 2,000 of those laptops, one bad service call there and you're toast, right? So all of that heritage, all of that momentum takes a long time to disrupt. And AMD is still pushing on that. They're still doing the right thing and going to them. But as long as Intel have cash to burn, they're going to keep that position. They're going to keep that socket.
Which is definitely up for debate how much longer they have cash to burn. And again, this wasn't in our notes, but another thing I want to throw. What do you think about this idea that like Strix Halo, which of course is like the 40 CU, 16 core mega APU coming out in, again, a couple months. How much of that do you think is not just a cool Apple, Ultra Pro like APU that's cool for the PC market to compete with Apple directly in a similar product category, but like, how much of it do you think also is kind of just a Trojan horse to force OEMs to use Radeon graphics? I've heard this idea brought up over and over, and I haven't put out a video about this yet, but I've recently heard over the past week that OEMs really like Strix Halo. They really like it. Like, how much of like if Strix Halo succeeds, is it just AMD is going to make bigger and bigger APUs because it's the only way to get OEMs to use their graphics cards?
Yeah. Well, there's the APU. We've been talking about this for 10 years. I remember asking this questions a different kind of way, but similar to it back in the Brazos days, the Llano days, when I was still back as a tech journalist and covering this stuff from your side. So yes, it definitely helps on the attach rate for Radeon, because you can't not have it, right? It makes for a better integrated solution. Everything's easier and simpler. It's a commonality. It reduces the amount of rework for the number of combinations, for tuning software. But still at the same time, you've still got all of this software out there that runs really well on Intel GPUs and Nvidia GPUs, because they've had so much entrenched market share. So I think it's not really a how do we get Nvidia out? It's a how do we take over Intel? How do we make sure there's no way that someone says, well, look, all my stuff is optimized for Intel. Can you just keep putting Intel in there, please? And that coming through in RFQs from government agencies, from government funded places. It's kind of like how Ford claimed they have the best-selling F-Series trucks. Was because every government tender comes out specifies you've got to buy Ford F-150s and 250s. So they have a natural market. That happens in everywhere else as well because of the heritage. You don't want to have, hey, I just deployed 3,000 new laptops into my new site, and they're all different from the other 15,000 we've got, and all our apps broke, and now all my in-house teams have to rewrite reports, they have to update software, they have to tweak and tune. You don't want to do that, and the easy way to avoid that is to say, thou shalt use Intel graphics, thou shalt use Intel CPU, or substitute any other IP you want. So that kind of approach is what they're trying to break out by putting in the scale of saying, well, look, some of your guys use Nvidia and some of you guys use Intel, and you're already doing this. So why don't you go top to bottom AMD? You've got a tiny APU, you've got a mid-sized CPU, you've got a big APU and a big CPU, and you can put discrete Radeon graphics in it. Now you've got a scalable portfolio top to bottom. Any particular use case, performance point, price point, energy requirement that you want to use, AMD has the answer, and that's the strategy. Be all things to these big enterprise and government customers, and the small and medium sized businesses that have these challenges. And the big APU or the bigger APUs as they're coming in really allow you to keep the discrete attach out, which means you move the discrete attach up to the price point. And then you get into the place where it's like, well, who's really using these? Okay, so it's the 200 guys that use AutoCAD need those laptops. Yeah, we'll find supporting them with a special set of software and whatever else. But the rest of the 15,000 people in the enterprise, they can just use the same thing for the next 5-10 years. That's fine. So I think it's more about kicking out Intel, right? So Nvidia is, they'd love more market share in graphics in laptops. So would AMD with discrete attach. Right now the discrete attach choice is Nvidia, but that's what they're weakest.
Especially on laptop, yeah.
Yeah, but that's where they're weakest because of the manipulations you can do with like, oh hey, well I can give you a Ryzen laptop CPU plus a Radeon laptop GPU for better combo pricing if we hit XY volumes over time, etc. All of that negotiation goes on, and yes, I'll do special software for you. AMD was never in the position to do that before. It used to be you get the request, well, I need the software pack, I need a special custom Radeon driver just for me. Can't do it. Now they're everywhere, right? So once you're in that position, yes, you've got the momentum, and this is how they grow it, how they keep it, and you're right? This is how they answer the question from the global OEMs, tier 1, tier 2. How do I compete with M4 or the next iteration? How do I compete with ARM AI notebooks? This is the answer.
All right, so moving to a category where AMD basically dominated out of the gate. Carbon Cry writes in and says, was HEDT as separate platform a temporary phenomena? Today, I believe HEDT is filled with R9s, i9s, or Ultra 9 products that are on desktop platforms, and a separate platform was only really needed due to Intel's unwillingness to launch higher core count products and AMD's inability to do the same with their technology at the time. I guess the counter argument is often expandability, but every time I asked for specifics, it just seems to become clear that this is needed for a work computer. In other words, we're talking about workstations at this point, not high-end desktop.
Yeah, that's a great way to try and approach what the market's doing. So for me, defining Threadripper, it was never just about pure CPU. There were three aspects. There was CPU performance, there was memory, channels, bandwidth, and then there was I/O, connectivity, like how much can you attach to it? And the three went together, right? You would scale for, all of those things in parallel. What we're seeing is, AM4, AM5 have taken where we initially launched Threadripper, right? First Threadripper 16 cores is now the high end of the AM5 market, which that's fantastic. Right now you've got a socket that goes from like 25, 35 watts to 180 watts. Never before seen scale, right? That's amazing. I really appreciate that. But from 180 to 280 or 300, well, that's where it gets into that rarefied air of high-end enthusiast desktop. But the workstation market is below that. They want that high-end. They want 64, 96, 128 cores. Very, very few people buy those, and even in the OEMs markets and those special systems that do that, right? What they want is a platform that scales from 8 to 128. So that means you've got to have lower end CPUs that still have all the I/O, that still have all the memory bandwidth, so you can modify this. And what this is then saying is, well, my pricing is per core instead of per I/O lane, per memory bandwidth, and all these things. And that's really hard to reconcile because you get the 8-core Zen Ryzen product and an 8-core Threadripper, and you can't price them side by side. The platforms don't work. The scale just isn't in there, so it's always up. And then people say, well, why would I buy that? Because this one's so much cheaper. I'm getting the 8 cores, and I don't need the bandwidth because it's only 8 cores. And it just goes in a circle, right? It's purely circular logic. So I think there was an initial expansion of workstation and high-end desktop when there was Ryzen and Threadripper. As Ryzen encroached into that, and DDR5 delivered the memory bandwidth that was needed for 16 cores, and PCIe Gen 5 delivered the PCIe bandwidth that was needed. And they put the extra lanes into the AM5 platform. They really captured the heart of that low-end workstation market. And now you're just left with specialty high-end. It's out there. People still want it. They need it. They want to be able to add in multiple crazy cards. Like, I think right now we could see an expansion of workstations. Like if you had a 32-core Threadripper for, random number, $1,000 with a $1,000 motherboard, and it had a ton of PCIe by 8s or by 16s, 128 PCIe lanes for AI accelerator cards, not GPUs, not Blackwells, 3 things,
or just
thinking
like
single
crazy fast SSDs that take up times 16 PCIe. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So, really fast storage, AI accelerators for data scientists to do their crazy Frankenstein data scientist things that they do, building new language models, building new small products to go into the market, then I think those would be gangbusters. But we're not seeing that being enabled, right? Everyone's trying to either do it on, you either buy a Ryzen 16-core desktop or you go rent cloud compute time and do it there. There's no in between. And some people would say, well, why would you ever own the hardware? And other people would say, well, why would you ever put all your stuff in the cloud and risk it? Right? There's both sides of that.
It kind of, to me, sounds like you're saying, well, look, HEDT, it's still there. It's still going to exist. Maybe it won't release as often as it used to. And that's because there's some people that still want it. But like, it is just maybe a fact that when Threadripper really had its heyday, it was the perfect market for that. It's not a perfect market anymore. Still doesn't mean it shouldn't exist, right? It's there. It's more niche. But, it's more niche for a reason that weren't reasons before. But it is what it is kind of what I'm getting from you.
Yeah, definitely that's the right way to say it. I think you've got we built the moment, bringing in 8 cores against 4 from Intel, bringing in 16 versus 8 from Intel. The price per core was crazy. We created and built that market, and Intel's, their Core X product line disappeared in 18 months because they just couldn't respond. They didn't have anything, and they remain out of that. So what has happened is, everyone moved to, is it a Ryzen? Is it a Threadripper? Is it an Epic? Epic in a workstation, I think, is where all the attention is, but because it's branded Epic, it's off everybody's charts, right? No one's looking for Epic workstations because you just know inherently that's an expensive box, and it doesn't have the high CPU core frequencies. It has much more, it's more about sustained, and that really is what the AI guys and other people who would really benefit from all those things are looking for, plus the reliability, the remote management, and you start talking yourself into just buying cloud time anyway, unless you're deeply worried about what you're doing on your machine being lost or access shared, etc., for privacy or security.
So I think, to my memory, this was something we talked about the last time you were on as well. Like, is there any argument to be had? And I remember making this argument because at Hardware Unboxed, they did this testing where they were like, I think I saw this at some other YouTubers' channels as well, that the issue was that Threadripper was becoming so niche that the software support wasn't even there. And so there's an argument, shouldn't there just be a 90 class motherboard for AM5 for the extra IO, and then workstation just, look, if you want the extra, just buy the workstation, dude, and we'll let you overclock it or something? Like, is there a chance that you think, because I still find it odd that they have both, that there's both workstation and high-end desktop right now, when I think most of the people that would want HEDT really want Ryzen to cost 50% more or twice as much, not 5 times more, because they don't need 96 cores. Like, I think that there was something we kind of agreed on last time you were on, but like, I just bring it up again. I mean, there's rumors coming out now about Zen 5 Threadripper, and of course it does actually go up to 96 cores and use, like the Epic socket basically. But like, do you still think there's an argument that like maybe there should just be what would it be now called, a Z890 Extreme motherboard with double the IO, and then workstation should just let you overclock and call it a day, so there's 2 platforms with more support?
Yeah, that would be my approach. I would love to see more IO on these platforms. Definitely what I would like to see happen would be along those lines, either expand AM5 or curtail the Epic platform to,
Or like
I don't know what
Sienna, some version of Sienna or something.
Exactly. Just scale it back, give you want the an Epic Lite, call it a Threadripper, enable the boost, give you some of the IO, but not all of it, depending on what price point you're targeting, and get rid of the server features. So I don't have to buy registered DIMMs, etc. I can use unbuffered EC DIMMs and CU DIMMs, etc. And that'll give you the stuff to get, like, to the software point. There is, we found where scaling rolls off, right? 16 to 32 is where the ROI gets really niche.
Even a lot of times in server, they don't want more than 32 cores to this day.
You have to really go program it and get really wide, and then you go, well, actually, I need multiple sockets, and I'm talking about scaling this across racks. And if I'm that parallel, why aren't I using the really parallel accelerators from GPUs? It really bounces around in terms of like, what should you be trying to do? And until someone builds it and tries it, then they don't know what it actually is. But if you ask AMD or Intel or Nvidia, how should I approach this parallel problem, they're not going to say, buy my cheap CPU. They buy my big expensive GPUs, right? Because they built them for exactly that purpose, and that's where their software efforts are focused. So yeah, there's tons of niches in there. I think there's a healthy market. I mean, I don't know how to size it. It was, multi-billion back in the day. It's probably still multi-billion, but looking at the way everything else is being prioritized, that's crazy to say.
Right? These other places are multi-100 billion, right?
Yeah. So the ROI just doesn't work for these companies.
All right. Well, so we touched on it a little bit, but like, let's actually get into it here. This piece of content is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com. Just in the past few weeks, Dan built a new PC with a fresh install of Windows 11 on a blazing fast Gen 5 NVMe SSD. And of course, that code for Windows 11 came from CDkeyoffer.com. And we've been using CDkeyoffer.com at Moore's Law for a very long time. I use it for my office software on both my desktop and my laptop, and that's because they're reliable. They've always been there for us, and they offer reasonable prices for Microsoft products that are usually set, in my opinion, at monopolistic pricing. And you know what? They're actually having a Black Friday sale right now. So if you're looking to get the best pricing on Microsoft software or games or other products on their website as well, please show support for a company that's shown support for the Moore's Law is Dead team and community for years by using offer code BROKENSILICON to get 25% off all Microsoft software and Die Shrink to get 3% off everything else. Again, you're supporting the channel even if you just click on the links in the description. But of course, also, if you need these products, getting them through CDkeyoffer.com during their big Black Friday sale, well, that helps the channel even more. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out CDkeyoffer.com today. What do you think about Zen 5? I mean, the initial launch was undoubtedly messy, shall we say. I would say it's, I mean, well, I don't have to say it. I can just look at the facts. You look at the sales, Zen 5 seems to have redeemed itself like that. I mean, they fixed the price, they fixed the performance issues. Intel said, hold my beer, I'll make you look even better with Arrow Lake. And now Zen 5 is just selling well. But like, how do you feel about like just in general how AMD handled the Zen 5 launch? Because just to kind of like set the table, I really don't get, to my memory, it's years of blur. Like, I believe it launched in August. Why not just launch it in September? Arrow Lake wasn't ready. Zen 4 is selling well. Why did we just give it a month, make it finish? Like, why was it launched? I wonder if you have any thoughts on how you would have handled that launch and if you would have changed how they segmented things at all. And when it comes to segmentation, I think they should have at least announced the 9800X 3D so that every review said, don't worry, though, this one isn't for gaming. But anyways, please go on.
Well, you just answered why they didn't do that, right? So,
but it didn't sell until it launched the 9800X 3D anyways. And the same thing happened with Zen 4. Everyone waited for X3D. Once X3D came out, non-X3D sold better too because people knew what they were buying.
Yeah, you can't convince MBAs that that's what's going to happen, right? They're going to say, right, but it could happen. Statistically, is there a chance that we could earn more money by not doing that? And you have to say, yes, there's a chance. And then, well, let's take the chance. So it's a zero-sum, argument. You don't lose anything from it. Personally, I like the Zen 5 lineup, mostly because of where I'm going to upgrade from. I'm on 2000, 3000 Ryzens and 12-gen Intel at the house. So, Ryzen 5 is a big, shining, glorious moment for me. It wasn't a great launch, but, those are hard to do these days with the way the market is. Like, everybody is super price sensitive. Everybody's looking for every little thing to criticize because of the high prices, because of the availability. That's the nature of the market now. So the GPU cycles are soaking up all the CPU and motherboard money. So trying to increase ASPs and trying to maintain margins is really tough. But no, you don't know that until you do it. Really reminds me of when we were in San Francisco, AMD, we're doing this. We're at this hotel. We had this big ballroom that we brought all the media and tech press into to do the presentations and pitch on this stuff. And it's the day of it. It's 7:30 in the morning. I'm walking to the elevator to go down to the ballroom, and Lisa Stewart happens to be on the same floor. And she walks around the corner and she says, "Hey, good morning, Harry. I'm great. How are you?" And she looks at me and she says, "Are you ready?" And I answered it straight, as a casual question. I'm like, "Yeah, I think so." And she said, "Well, here's the thing. Doesn't matter whether you're ready or not. The moment is here, and now we have to go do it. And we just got to keep that in mind. And the moment is here. Go get it done, and then we'll figure out what we should do next, or better next time. But today, go." And she wasn't being like critical. She was, she was coaching, encouraging. It was something that stuck with me. But today is the day. So you pick a time and you say, "This is it," and you go. And it does a lot of this stuff. You can get too much into the competitive story, right? And it too much in the gamesmanship. And I really think that that's where Intel is struggling right now. Is they're in the gamesmanship. They're in their heads around that, and they should be telling their own story, why they're great, why they did things, what they were trying to achieve, and how they're going to get there. And if they stuck to that, they get the belief and the permission to do things from. But because they're fumbling around trying to do the competitive thing, then they have this issue. So AMD, I think they fixed fast what they needed to fix. Market adjustments. It shows that they listen to the market, that they're watching what everybody's saying. It's a really good reaction. Was it? Is that something they should have had to have done? I mean, every company that's publicly traded has a fiduciary duty to maximize the return to their shareholders, right? There's laws about this stuff. So they all try to do that. So everybody in the management, everybody on the team is incentivized to try and achieve the most increase of profits, of revenue, to hit the targets, all of that stuff. And every once in a while, they get too aggressive and they have to claw it back. And it can be for internal reasons because you didn't nail the messaging, you didn't nail the product. It can be for external reasons. The market shifted between when you decided what you were going to do and how it came out. And it can be a combination of both. So, I don't know that I would have been able to magically stand there and say, I fixed this. It would never happen on my watch. Ryzen 1 launch happened on my watch, and we had a heck of a time getting that thing going with the memory and all other things.
Yeah, but I heard people compare this launch to Zen 1, and in some ways you can. It's the biggest redesign of the architecture since Zen 1. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. Zen 1, even with it wasn't even close. I mean, he had 6 cores competing with 12 threads, competing with a quad-core, quad-thread i5. It wasn't... I still think with the issues, right when it happened, you didn't have... And I've heard people say this too, maybe because Piledriver was so much weaker, it couldn't look worse, no matter how unoptimized it was. But there were a couple games at launch where, like, Zen 5 was like a 30% regression from Zen 4. It's been fixed. But, like, that still is like... And this leads me to... I've heard people... There's a contingent of Moore's Law is Dead fans that I see in the Discord say this quite often at a lot of recent AMD launches, which is they kind of make fun of AMD and go, here we go, AMD is going to launch everything for 20% more than they should, and then it's going to need a patch, and then they're going to drop prices 30% instead of just maybe launching it 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later at the price it would have been, and maybe they could have even held a higher price longer term. And I feel like, in some ways it's coulda, shoulda, woulda, but in other ways it really seems like with Zen 4 to Zen 5, I feel like we almost saw a repeat of the same mistakes. And I've heard people like make this argument that like, oh, this really cost AMD. And on the one hand, I think it might have. On the other hand, I look at their sales and market share and I go, they seem to be doing okay. How much of that does affect AMD in your opinion? Because it does seem like AMD's opinion is, let's see what we can get away with, and then let's do price drops. And then you got to wonder, yeah, but if you would have nailed it first, would you have not felt pressured to drop prices as much? Or how much does this really matter overall to like desktop sales? Not because it's not just do it yourself, it's everything. Like, how much do you think that actually matters every generation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the challenge is that there's no bellwether, there's no benchmark for this, right? They set the benchmark every single time because there's one other company trying to do the same thing and they're not doing it well. So how do they model this? How do you war game this out with real data to say this is going to be the impact versus the other, right? T-shirt sales, you can do that. Console sales, you can do that. Phone sales, you've got multiple competitors in there, so you can watch different strategies and apply.
Right, you know exactly what to price a PlayStation because you know what the Xbox costs. Yeah,
right. Yeah, but when you're bringing in something that's redefining performance per dollar in the category, how do you value that? Right? You want to go up. You want to deliver still more to the customer, and you don't want to upset them, but you also need to fund everything else you're trying to do. Like, oh yeah, remember all that AI investment we got to do? So you've got all these multiple things pulling at it in all different ways, and you're never going to find an executive that's going to say, it's not okay to do a price drop after 30 days when we see what the market reaction is, because you can't go up. Right? Because that's the other option of it is like, well, let's launch it at 10% lower than the last generation. And if the sales are really good, then we'll call that intro pricing and raise it 10%. And then we'll keep raising it until the sales roll off. Like, imagine the community reaction to that pricing strategy. There are companies that do that. There are suppliers in technology and others that have intro pricing. And after a few years, it goes up when you think you'd be like, it would be cheaper later on. But no.
I feel like Xbox and PlayStation have been trying to do that a little bit in the past couple of years, but yeah.
Right. So, there's all these different ways. So I think it's a hard thing to say you could just nail it because that's one person's opinion of what nailing it is. If you go ask 5 other guys, you'll get 5 other nailed it. And someone's going to make a call and they're always going to err on the side of, oh, this is the bigger number better, so I'm going to do that. And that's how that really short circuits. There's until you get someone walk in and say like, "Hey, this is, you just missed an audience," and AMD have plugged into all the different communities now. They're not ignoring the communities. Different communities have different weightings internally, but the feedback is all captured and they hear it. They're just not able to respond to everybody's request. Same way as, you think about why there's no Threadripper replacement yet, right? Not because people aren't asking for it. It's because not enough of the right people are asking for it. Or is it because they've got X amount of dollars and they can do these three things, and this is number 4, right? As wonderful and as beautiful as number 4 would be, 1, 2, and 3 take priority, and that is what it is.
So actually, I want to ask you a couple CPU segmentation questions here, though. PC Dog writes in and says, should AMD have released their Zen 5 X3D products first and then release their standard products? My personal opinion is it should have been 9800 X3D and then maybe 9700, 9600, like non-X, and then you can roll out other things if you need to or something like that. But I think just in general, when we look at how much of a home run the 9800 X3D is, I mean, good Lord, it's just ridiculous how well it's selling, especially now that it can clock to, I mean, the multi-core performance is closer to the 9900X than the 9700X because of how high the all-core boost clocks are. Do you think it's, and obviously a lot of this will have to do with when Intel is launching, if they can afford to wait, but like with Zen 6, for example, should they just be doing all Vcache and then the non-X is the non-Vcachers? Like, because I think we're getting close to making the argument. I'm not sure why you have more than a few non-Vcache models. Obviously, there should be a few, but why aren't most of the models Vcache at this point?
Yeah, I mean, that's a product cost question. The extra cost of the cache, the packaging, the testing, the integration, the development, all of that stuff. There's a fundamental requirement to build the Vcache product, and it's having the original product working and out ready to go, right? So what you're saying is to the bean counters, right, is like, hey, delay all of that revenue you were going to get for that quarter and wait until this point over here. And, everybody gets heartburn over that. So personally, what I would love to see is the return of the full stack launch drop. Like, here's the 9 CPUs from Ryzen 9 to Ryzen 3. The 3 chipsets, the motherboard ecosystem, everything together. That's really hard to coordinate and do. You do end up with things getting overlooked. Would the X3D be heralded as the gaming champ if they launched them all together? Would everybody had the time to really study it and learn it? It's about focus. It's about storytelling. It's about enabling the market as quickly as possible. I think in the term, going to your segmentation question, X's or X3Ds and non-X's are the non-Vcache, that makes a lot of sense. I think that probably you would want to go to a different brand, I think, because you've had so many generations now of X's on these different parts for higher power. It used to mean that it was a 95 watt CPU and non-X was a 65 CPU, and then that went away, and now it's the best in that segment, and you have lower versions. But those kind of things, you've trained a lot of people, from retail salespeople in Best Buy through to the sell-in agents at the distributors and at the OEMs and the people who write all the marketing copy downstream from AMD and the non-client component channel. They're all trained and now they're iterating on those things. And if you disrupt that, then it's like relaunching. So if I was relaunching 3D Vcache to say like it's the best CPU of the Ryzen line, then maybe that would be the way that you would get Ryzen Ultras. But I nearly threw up in my throat just saying that to you because I don't want to see that.
Yeah, but we probably will.
Someone's going to take that suggestion now, or maybe they're already thinking it. I don't know what it is, but I think there's a strong case to be made now that they've fixed the ability to clock them up, to show this huge performance increase in not just gaming workloads, but several others. And now they've fixed the launch issues and stuff. That's the other thing is like, if you're going back and changing and saying, well, we'll do 9800 X3D first, imagine that with the 30% performance drop in some titles. Ooh, that kills that tech really fast, right? You don't want that.
Well, then maybe we don't launch it until it's ready. But yeah.
But, how do you find those things out, right? Like you watch that launch and they say, well, we were using this version of Windows that has all the fixes in, and we didn't know that wasn't coming out until, this point of time.
I've heard that argument too, that they never really knew when it would be fixed. So what were they supposed to do?
So you need a lot of stars to align, and it is a simple logistical problem on paper, but in actuality, it takes a lot more intense coordination than is really feasible to get done, which sounds absolutely crazy for the companies that are valued in the trillions of dollars that they can't talk to each other well enough to coordinate. When I'm launching my CPU and I need this version of Windows to be available, can we line this up? Yes, no, right? There's so many things that go on in that because these are monstrous products, and trying to get two different companies lined up on one product introduction has always been too hard.
Yeah, just to finish my thoughts on it, I mean, I just don't get why you couldn't do like, I don't know, like the 9900X, which would have, really made at least done pretty well, I think, wherever it was. And then 9700, 9600, boom, that'll get the bugs out. And then the ones we know everyone's excited about, 9950X, which I think could still exist next to an X3D version because there's some people that just want all 16 cores at the highest clocks.
Yeah.
And then a 9950X3D, 9800X3D, 9600X3D, boom, that's the second wave once everything's fixed. I just don't see why that's not something that could be done. Now, it's a bit coulda, shoulda, woulda this time, but I can't help but wonder if it's time to just do that with Zen 6. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I would like to see using the model numbers a bit more, like the 9950X, right? No 3D V cache. 9970 is the 3D V cache. So I don't need to look into what does X mean and how do I delimitate all those. I just know bigger number better, right? I got 20 more Ryzen points, so I've got more performance somewhere. That's the difference.
But then wouldn't that technically mean it's supposed to be 32 cores because there's 70 at the end of it, and that's what it was named a Threadripper? I don't know. Maybe 55X3D or something.
Well, putting my Brandon Butthead hat on, I'll say, well, I didn't put a Threadripper on it, so 70 doesn't have to mean 32 cores, right?
And 70 sounds, everyone loves the number 7. 55 seems weird, I suppose.
Yeah, so there's things you could do. I don't know. Maybe it's 9950X is the non-X3D, and 995CX is the cache, right? There's a number of different ways you can get cutesy with this thing. There's not a way that everybody's going to like because of I just told you. You gave me a perfect example of how everybody's trained on what the numbers mean. That's why you can't break it, right? 70 means 32 core. Can't do that. So.
But I say that, and then they launched this thing called the 5900 XT, and apparently it has 16 cores and not 12. And I didn't even realize it had 16 cores until I saw the reviews. I actually my brain ignored part of the slide that said 16 cores. I just was like, oh yeah, that's got to be 12 cores.
Yeah, but
faster.
You'd be super happy getting a 5900 XT and being like, oh, I'm going to get 12 core performance. Then
I could argue they undersold it.
This is fantastic. So yeah, maybe it's a 9945 or something. Then you go, whoa, that's even better. That's even spicier. I love it. It's the peri peri chicken. I don't know.
Xander K writes in and says, is it possible that AMD, in a 4D chess move, launched Zen 5 early, knowing that its mediocre performance would lure Intel into releasing Air Lake also early and unfinished as they did, just to then release the 9800X3D to utterly destroy Intel once and for all in desktop gaming? Of course, I think this is probably a mostly facetious question here. But I wonder what you think about that, too, because I also don't know why Air Lake launched before it was done. So it's like they both did it. So there's something, obviously the through line is Microsoft, but still, I wonder what you think about Air Lake's launch as well.
Yeah, Air Lake is, they definitely didn't go when they were ready. They were going because they made a commitment to specific people and they had to deliver on that commitment. And they were living through hey, the day is here, let's go, make the best of it. For which, kudos for getting out there, but oof, that one's going to hurt for a while, right? So they got to repair that. There are cycles to buying, right? That you got to be on shelf for the holiday season, the biggest buying cycle, the way to do that is to launch in Q3, right? Q3 launches are Q4 under the tree, around the table. That's your holiday presents, where it's got enough time to get the patches in, get out and flow through the ecosystem. Everybody's aware of it, and it's still the new hotness. So that's why they had to push, because everybody else has, you release the CPU into the component channel and start shipping to OEMs. A system integrator probably needs 6 to 12 weeks, depending on how much things you changed on your platform and everything else, to build a PC around it and get that on shelf. But an OEM needs 3 months, right? They need 4 months to be able to build designs, test them, integrate them, get them ready, get all the documentation done, translated into 22 languages, train the support staff and everything else, and build their supply chain and have that ready to go, so that they can do that. So if you look at when did everybody launch and when is the buying cycle, that's why, right? Did AMD hope to stick a finger in Intel's eye? Absolutely. Always a goal.
I think they did. They just hope they stuck it harder, but I guess it worked out anyways,
it
right?
worked out, right? They managed to curly and mow them with the double finger point, but that's because Intel didn't put their hand up and get their product out in a small, fast enough way, right? So it's they're still going to have products out there and people are going to buy it. So they showed up, they've delivered on the commitments. But I don't think anybody's super happy at Intel about that. It's now the good, honest work of ramping the design wins, solving the problems, the day-to-day blocking and tackling of, how do we fix firmware issues, software regressions, performance improvement, key applications, the little niggles you always find out about. For corner cases of engineering, as people build weird and wonderful things and try things you never thought of when you were first designing it.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing, though. I'm looking at Amazon CPU bestsellers, and I got it wrong last time. I showed a picture, and it was 49. I didn't even notice, or maybe it changed last minute when I took the screenshot. But I do not see a single Arrow Lake SKU on Amazon in the top 50. And when I talked to an OEM about, I was like, I see some of these reports that you guys are going to bundle Blackwell with Raptor Lake. What's that about? And I won't say which OEM, of course, for obvious reasons. But this person told me, we don't really like it. We're hoping to just buy more Meteor Lake because it's cheaper, and hope that customers see Ultra and think that means Ultra. So that's how Arrow Lake has landed so far. And I know that they're claiming that there's going to be some patches here, but I don't know, man. I don't know how much you really have to say about it, but I'm really concerned about Intel at this point after this Arrow Lake launch. Like, I've got top 50 CPUs being sold, like the top, let's see here, 13 of the top 14 on Amazon are Ryzen. And then Arrow Lake isn't even in the top 50. I think half of that is that it's not a lot of supply right now, to be honest.
Right.
And when I talk to OEMs, they're like, Raptor Lake and Meteor Lake, actually. Like, I'm not sure. I mean, a very sobering thought is if the 9800X 3D is like 20, let's say 15 to 30% faster than Arrow Lake in gaming, I think Panther Lake might be 10% faster, 15% faster. Okay, but so it's conceivable, though, that Intel would take 2-3 generations to catch up to AMD in gaming. I don't even know if I have a question. I'm kind of waiting for your reaction to this. And I know it's a tense subject, but it's like, I think this is worse than Zen 5, though. I think this is a pretty deep hole that's been dug.
Well, they're trying to fix a lot of things, right? Like, if you look back on the last couple of desktop CPU launches, the number one theme that came out from everybody evaluating Intel was, okay, you're pretty close on the performance. There's a few wins in there, but holy cow, the power, the temperature, the heat. This is untenable. You can't keep going like this. When are you going to do something about it? So they reacted and they did something about it, and they lost some performance, but they fixed the things that everybody screamed at them about. But they didn't keep everything else. So, the most technology aware consumers are the DIY PC component buyers, right? The people that build themselves. You understand what a Raptor Lake is, what a Media Lake is, what a Arrow Lake is, and so that's why you see them not in the top 50, because the preference isn't there. You go down to the people that buy pre-built PCs. That's where I think you'll start to see Arrow Lake taking some spots. They're still not going to be number one by a long shot. The comments from the OEMs are saying, yeah, we want Meteor and Raptor is code for Intel want too much money for the new stuff, and I'm not going to pay it. So this is pricing to performance, power to performance, all of that. They've stumbled on this one. They'll pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and continue going on. Like if you think back to how when the first FX Bulldozer launched compared to the Intel processors, I think that an Arrow Lake is in a way better position relative to a Zen 5 than that FX was to those old Intel CPUs. They're far closer in performance, far closer in power. The features are there. They've got the ecosystem. I don't think they're anywhere near as dire as a situation. And there is actually a playbook on how to turn around a CPU company and make them successful again. It's written by Lisa Su. So they do have examples in front of them of like, how do we fix this? And I think that they'll figure it out. It's going to take them longer than they've said. They don't know that because they haven't done it, and that's fair. But they need to start focusing. Like they're in the moment of they need to do less with more focus, and really they've just been trying to shrink into different areas, but they're not increasing the focus. And now they've really got to increase the focus. So it's going to come down to some really hard calls internally. What is important? What is the priority? And they're going to err it on data center, on AI accelerators, and on notebooks. And client desktop is going to be fourth on that list. And anytime there's enough money to fund 3 or 4, you're going to see that trickle out as this way. It's just the nature of the business. So again, the AI, this is the byproduct of the AI revolution and chase that's going on, sucking all of the air out of the room and really impacting the desktop enthusiasts, because we're all sitting here going, well, look, CPUs cost a lot more than they did. Motherboards cost a lot more. Memory costs a lot more. Graphics cards are ridiculously more than what they were, and it's not just inflation; it is price increases as well. For the performance per dollar curves are way gone. So that's the challenge, right? You're seeing a lot of companies calling softness in the global markets for consumer goods, in IoT and in computing, but so these companies are not going to keep throwing money into softening markets. They're going to go after markets that are expanding, especially when they're in dire need, and Wall Street is making up rumors of who's going to acquire them and how and all that kind of stuff.
Well, speaking of throwing money into a softening market, ARC. Let's talk about Intel ARC here for a second, because I just put out a video today. It was really kind of like a pre-CES, like I've heard wild rumors about, I think we all knew basically a month ago that, if not longer, RDNA 4 and RDNA 4 and Blackwell were going to be announced at CES and blah, blah, blah. And then all these rumors popped up, I swear, in the last 3 weeks. Oh no, it's going to be sooner. And I put out a video like, no, it's CES. But part of that was also some surprise stuff I got about, not really surprise to me, about Battlemage. Seems like the top card, which they've already canceled the really top one, but the mid-range one really, that was still supposed to come out, hasn't taped out yet. It's supposed to come out now, Q1, Q2. There's questions of if that would even be competitive with RDNA 4 and the RTX 5070 at that point. But like, where do you see ARC going? Because it's the information I got over the past week is really just lines up with what I've been hearing for a couple of years now, which is that it's just too little too late. They need to get core back on track. They need to get server back on track, and putting a lot of money into, I mean, what it sounds like the B580 that's supposedly going to paper launch in December, it kind of sounds like a 7600 XT 12 gigabyte, which is like, well, 7600 XT has 16, launched a year ago, and uses 6 nanometer. Are we really going to pour all this money into a 4 nanometer competitor to a 6 nanometer product? Like, when is it going to stop? I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I enjoy more competition in markets, but it's got to be real competition.
Sure.
I think AMD worry about that competition more than Nvidia in the desktop GPU market. So it's sad, but not unpredictable for ARC to be in the situation it's in. I'm disappointed it didn't compete. It hurt AMD more than it hurt Nvidia, but the execution struggles, you see them everywhere. Some of it is business as usual, because building complex GPUs is incredibly hard, and Intel now know that. And if there was funding for the top three things and desktop CPUs was 4, then desktop GPUs are 8. So that's that prioritization continues to happen. I think there's going to be fans and enthusiasts that are vocal that will say, I'm glad I have it. There's going to be some people who are persuaded by the all Intel story. Oh, hey, I can have an Intel CPU and GPU, and I can move from integrated Intel graphics to discrete Intel graphics, and it simplifies things for me. You'll be able to find those random people that do that. AMD trying the same thing. So it's this is Intel hubris and pathos as they navigate the turnaround and reinvent themselves. So they've walked away from it and are finishing out on the commitments and what's in flight to maximize the ROI on the investment for every single dollar they can get without spending additional dollars and throwing good money after bad. So personally, these situations, I think you should invest in building the best products possible versus going through the motions. And that's, because when you're in a tough situation, soft markets, you weren't competitive, building a wow product, even if it's just one, is a better thing to do for your company than it is to just go, we'll see what happens, and not really care about it.
We're going to compete from top to bottom, and none of it's going to actually be that competitive.
Right. I mean, if that happens, you can go out there and say what you want to do, and then when you come back, you got to be real about where you are when you do it, and say, okay, when that next lesson is, and it doesn't feel like they've had an opportunity to take that next lesson, but watching who's moving where and how they're reorganizing, there's no continuation of this activity. So I think the market knows that. So I think it's going to really struggle. People launch it to say they delivered on a commitment,
right.
A few cards out there so everybody can say, oh, what might have been, this would have been fantastic if only, and then it will fade away. But they will continue to invest in the integrated graphics. The ARC roadmap continues on in that fashion. And AMD are really blazing a trail there for them by putting in the bigger APUs, right? Because they're then giving Intel room to breathe as well, and say like, oh well, you can go better than just an Intel tiny GPU that can light up 3 displays and play video on one of them and Word docs and Excel on the other 2. Into all right, well now it can do some richer, more immersive experiences, but it's so they're going to get some continuation there. But discrete graphics, I think they've proved they don't know how to integrate well into the AIB ecosystem. They don't know how to play with the big game developers on AAA titles. Although I will caveat that and say that will help them really well in integrated graphics gaming, right? Notebook gaming. That is still something people want to do. So there's keeping those titles AAA or not, working on those APUs is going to be critical.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, and the thing I keep coming back to in the past few months is like this argument of like people going, oh, well, I hope they just keep trying to compete in the high end with GPUs. And I'm like, do you guys know how much money Nvidia is spending on R&D for GPUs at this point? It's like, you're already starting like 3 steps behind, and you've got the other people like inventing, jetpacks to go faster than you. It's like the idea of like escape velocity. You miss the escape velocity. Like they are just accelerating and accelerating 1.1 times 1.1. Well, you're 1.05 times 1.05. It's just going to grow away from each other at this point. And I think you've got to just do what you can do to keep the foundation alive so that when you have the money, you can try again. And anything else would just hurt anything else that's much more important to them that they could be spending money on. This piece of content is brought to you by Silver Knight PCs. They are a veteran-owned American company based in Fayetteville, North Carolina. They offer everything from enterprise and business services to individual PC parts, including collector's items that are hard to get, to pre-built PCs, to excellent repair services. And of course, I can attest to that last one personally. One evening this summer, out of nowhere, my PC, the one I usually use for making all of this content, just shut off and would not turn on. I did the usual troubleshooting of checking, the GPU, RAM, motherboard, and eventually though, around 4 a.m., I had to make a judgment call. Was I really about to strip down the PC from top to bottom, check every part in another PC, and then try to reinstall Windows, which would undoubtedly mean I don't get any sleep and might delay the broken silicon from coming out? Or was I just going to get my, Hotpoint tablet and call for help? Well, I chose the latter, and I'm glad I did, especially because I called Silver Knight PCs. They got me a shipping label within, hours in the middle of the night, or really morning at that point, and they got to work as quickly as possible. And I've gotten it back by now. I'm using it right now to make this ad, and really you should check out the other custom PCs they make as well. They're very easy to get them to make one for you too, because they have an excellent build tool that takes the guesswork out of everything. You tell them what types of games you even play, in addition to the performance and the budget you have or what you're looking for, and they customize and act as expert consultants for you to make the perfect PC just for you. And they give good advice, by the way. I've talked to them. They play PC games. They are enthusiasts. They're not going to do something silly like an OEM would do and put an RTX 3050 6GB with a non-K i9 just so they can claim there's i9 and RTX graphics included. No, they are actual enthusiasts that will give you an actual enthusiast PC like me or any expert would really advise. And at the end of the day, this company supported me. And so I would be honored if all of you watching this, if you want some of these types of products, if you supported them in return, which also helps me get even better support and deals for them in the future if you do. So one more time, support Moore's Law is Dead by supporting Silver Knight PCs today. But I wonder what you think about this, because I believe the last time you were on, we were just starting to talk about, or I think, like that big RDNA 4 was canceled, and that AMD is going for mid-range. There's a lot of catastrophizing about that, although I know you've obviously, let alone me, but you've much longer than me, have been around long enough to know that, frankly, every 2 to 3 gens, AMD does not go for the ultra high end. Like, this is a pattern where they're like high end, mid-range, high end, mid-range. Like, they do it all the time. 6000 series, arguably, certainly Polaris and 3870. I mean, this is 5870 was just so good it managed to beat actually Nvidia's high-end card, even though I don't think they were really trying to. Like, you talk about like do one product really well. Do you think that could be what like the 8800 XT is? Because it really does sound like it's going to be 7900 XT, 7900 XTX raster. Surprisingly, maybe 4070 Ti super ray tracing. If you could just hit that at 500 or something, I just think that would make so much more of a splash than like losing to the 5090 by 20%. You know what I mean?
Yes, no, I totally agree, and I think that's what I want to see. I'm reminded of the old, I think it was Evergreen architecture, the Radeon HD 4850, 4870 against Fermi, right? Fermi was different class performance, different class power. That was where all the leaf blower memes came from. But AMD really nailed it with the 4870 and 4850 in terms of performance per dollar and the efficiency. And, they didn't, and you go in the forums, people and ask like, hey, what card should I buy? And the answer was money, no object. You buy Fermi. But if you care about how much money you're spending or you only have a limited budget, then it's AMD all over the rest of the way. And the market share reflected that, right? So go for the meat of the market, go for it. I personally don't have any appetite for more $1,000 plus GPUs, no matter how fast they are. So, if the new cards are sub $700 and they're winning in the performance per dollar range and they give me the great gaming experiences that I want, they move the ball forward in terms of people want to upgrade from a 3070, a 4070, then that's going to be a clean win, I think, for AMD. And I think that's something to be proud of, no matter what the number on it is, whether it's 8800, 8950, XTX, Uber, Wildcat. It doesn't matter, right? That going after that heart of the market, getting back to your foundation, making your business units profitable and well respected, and delivering excellent execution, building back trust, then gives you permission to come back and say, well, let's maybe go for the high end again. But like you said, the difference between Nvidia's investment in GPU and everybody else's is whole companies now, just immense levels of investment. So if you're not gonna go do that same level of investment, why would you expect to have the same level of results? And that's it's
Good
really
point. I don't know,
complicated.
but a lot of people on Reddit seem to think you can just snap your fingers and have the exact same thing with a quarter of the budget for some reason.
Right. I mean, it's not even a quarter. It's
Right.
lower than that. So just looking at the size of AMD's graphics budget versus Nvidia's that's not a fair comparison. And I think we're starting to see the tide turn on AMD as the plucky underdog upstart coming to get you and running up the steps to cheer in front of the statue moment is, everybody's like, nah, man, you're $1 trillion company. Why don't you have resources for this? Can't you fix this? What is going on over there? Where's your head at? And I think there's a little bit of that in the Zen 5 launch too, right? What do you mean you couldn't figure this out? How are you not able to do this? So, the best one in the world. I would love to see AMD competing at the high end of the GPUs. The investment's not there. It's not been there in the financial statements. So you can see that it's not been done. Where has it moved to? AI, data center. I think that's a reset moment, a new architecture can unify some of these things. Like, we haven't seen NVIDIA's gaming performance hurt by their investment in AI, right? Introducing tensor cores and all the other associated developments in their SoC to support AI have not impacted gaming in a negative way. So
yeah, they found a way to make it work for gaming, even if they had to find a way. They did. They found a way.
They found a way. So now AMD has to find a way to, okay, let's go focus on AI, build this mid-range GPUs, but then you can see that then there's a moment down the roadmap where that trickles and kicks in again. So I'm not saying this is a placeholder launch. I think that the AMD graphics guys are absolutely meaning to win in gaming at the mid-range, and they are deadly serious about it. But that there's a future benefit to come through here with the architecture advancements as they redesign and redeploy and refocus.
Well, yeah, and I think this is something that's also come up over the past 6 months on Broken Silicon a lot. Like, we've always talked about, like, oh, well, AMD only has so much money, and they have to prioritize what they spend money on. And then when you look at a high end, or should I say an enthusiast really, tier GPU, an issue I always had about hearing about this idea of Navi 4C, which is of course like the 12 chiplet insanity. They were legitimately considering launching for RDNA 4. I leaked a picture of it. It just looked nuts, but I'm like, there's no way that thing's like less than $2,500. I mean, it looks like an MI300. And let's say it beat the 5090 by 20%, but it didn't have equivalent upscaling tech. It didn't have equivalent a lot of these other features that NVIDIA has. I think NVIDIA, with their brand recognition, could maybe just get away with charging the same price for something that costs less to make. And until AMD has the resources to support at that level, at the top level, it might make more sense to make less and support it better, which is, I think, an interesting argument that I'm really become convinced of, is if they don't do like 2, 3, 4 dies, like RDNA 2 is, I think, 4 different configurations. Well, okay, what they're going to do is just 2. They're monolithic. We'll nail the software. We're freeing up resources to just nail these tiers. And it's not really worth going, like, maybe learning from Intel's mistakes, going for the top, unless you have everything fixed on the sides, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about expectations. It's about like everything you just described, and then that comes back into your big APU story, right? Like it used to be that AMD would launch 5 different chips to cover from $50 to $500 price points, which is just now it's impossible to do. You can't build 5 chips to cover those price points. It's got to be 1 or 2. So that bottom end really relieves the pressure off that team to do that with the APU story. The high end being so high now that it's really out of, it's workstations, it's commercial, it's
I mean, I have a 4090.
business.
The performance is honestly ridiculous. Like, I almost wonder how many people really need that much performance. I know someone's going to say in the comments, I can barely do 4K 60. And I don't know what settings you're using, my dude, but I can do quite more than 4K 60 with it with reasonable settings.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always going to be some guy that can show you where you missed a brushstroke to paint the corner, but the 4090 customer is a pro gamer or someone that's got the disposable income
or using it for work,
right? Using it for work. They have another justification for why it exists and why or they get freebies, right? I don't know what it is, but everybody else is not buying those things. The market share, we don't ever see 90 cards leading on the Steam hardware survey, right? Why is that? Is it because they're bad at gaming? No, it's because the number of people who buy them is just so small. It's so it's ROI. You've got to get the reputation. Once they nail a great product with the reputation and they nail all the software challenges, then they'll be able to move into that high end competitive again. So it's a reset moment and reabsorb, I think.
And am I wrong? I feel like you were leaning towards kind of saying this, like you kind of hinted with the word like stalling or buying time. This is a theory I have, that UDNA is something that could allow them to much more effectively compete in high end again, because it's hard to justify a $2,500 graphics card if all it's used for is gaming. I mean, we see the GPU market is in a downturn right now, but Nvidia can sell them all into AI. AMD can't as easily. Were they to be able to sell a 7900 XTX with a different name and 48 gigabytes of RAM as, something they can sell for 10 grand like Nvidia can, I mean, it's so easy to justify, so I wonder what you think, like if UDNA, because I've seen a lot of people like go, why would they do UDNA? And it's like, I think that's the only way they can justify making high-end graphics cards again.
Yeah, I mean, this is a rinse and repeat of the Zen strategy, right? The first Zeppelin die was for EPYC and for Ryzen. And that reuse really enabled us to have the two-market approach back then. So look at it now. What are NVIDIA doing? Well, they take an architecture that they put into high-end server products, and then they de-feature, de-swizzle, make into professional-grade cards, and then take it down again, make it into consumer cards. But it's really all the same thing. Right now, to compete with that, you have to follow the same strategy. And if it's UDNA or whatever it is, comes in and is fantastic for the AI strategy in the data center as a attach card for to go into the Instinct product lines, like it's an MI 400, 500, whatever it comes in, it goes into Instinct, and then it goes into Radeon for gaming, and there's minimal changes need between the three, like you can modulate clocks, enabled cores, and memory attached. Then wow, that's how you get multiple products that win in different markets at the high end, right? When you just try to build a high end gaming card and then say it's also really good at AI, is where you get the trouble, because everyone doesn't believe you. You have to come at it the other way. So as much as I and others in the enthusiast market have hated we get the quote unquote hand-me-downs from the server market, from the data center market. That's what's delivering your best performance and
that's
your
what gives you Threadripper, man.
It gives you Threadripper, it gives you 4090s, it gives you all of these things together. So unless you got to be willing to take these compromises in thought process of how they build the product stack to get the high end competition, so that maybe a 5090 isn't $3,000 like the old RTX Titan V was, but
it might be though.
it might be, right? They can price whatever they want, so who knows what it's going to be.
Transpose 1195 writes in and says, how are multi-generation product roadmaps defined, and how do these change over time? For example, RDNA 4 appears to be a mid-range focused iteration of a prior generation, while the future shift to UDNA looks more like a reset. What market factors and timescales drive these roadmaps in general? And I'm really curious because I know we talked about big RDNA 4 being canceled, but so much more from people who reached out to me afterwards really catalyzed what I believe happened. I just what insight can you give us into when that decision would have been made, why that decision would have been made or not been made, and when that decision would have to be made by, and how?
Yeah. So, in general terms, there'll be a process of you have a concept, and then that'll go into a set of requirements, and then that'll go into an architecture spec, and then that'll go into a project plan. And each of those are kind of like gates where everybody gets together and says, yeah, we agree to move forward and increase the resource investment. So your concept is usually very, very cheap to build for the company. There's a few guys coming together and putting together some slideware to go rah everybody and say, hey, here's the market opportunity, here's the features we need, this is the technology required, this is why we believe we can do it, and this is the time frame we need to do it in to be successful. Here's the ask roughly in terms of what the product cost needs to be, what the software investment is, what the target pricing is, and what are the key requirements that we need from everybody else, the commitments to move forward. And everybody looks at that and says, okay, yeah, we can fit this into our overall strategy. Then it moves forward into deeper devolution of the requirements of what you're trying to do into an architecture spec. So that looks like that. So everywhere you go from each one of those stages increases the resources, and that wall time of resources assigned to projects is that money building up and up and up and up. And when you get to canceling projects, is because you look forward and you say okay, the investment's changed. What we planned on was X amount, and now it's doubled. And the market opportunity, we thought it was here, and it's half. And now the return on investment doesn't work anymore. So that's when you fundamentally look at it and go, okay, that's a bad use of money. There's always more ideas than can be executed for products, for requests from customers. And it really depends on, is your company market driven? The most important thing is your biggest customers' inputs and what they're telling you for technology partnerships, for business opportunities, for where they want to go over generations? Or is it an internal, we can see something cool we can do, we have a vision, and we're going to go make it true, and we're going to build a castle out of air and then make it into reality over time? AMD is kind of 50-50 on that, I think. Maybe a little bit more on the market side, right? So whenever customers are saying, you're pitching, when you get to these concepts, you don't just internally look at them and 5 guys show it to another group of 5 guys. You go test it at key customers and get the yeses and the nods, and oh yeah, I'd like that. And then they give the feedback of, well, you should do this and this, and are you going to do that and the other? And that loop keeps going. And at a certain point, when enough customers go, I'm still in, but only if your pricing is here, or I'm still in if you include this requirement for me, and that's a hard requirement because your competitor will do this for me, and if you won't, then I'll go with them. And then those start to stack up, and it tends to push one way or the other, and then it comes down to how can we execute? And then it's, are you relying on something magical happening, like a third-party enablement? Is everything you're doing reliant upon a third party doing something as well so that you can stack on top of it? And if that's the case, then you really have shaky ground, right? So AI is a great example of that in consumer notebooks. Everybody was reliant on Copilot, and then it went away. So now everybody's sitting there going, I got AI PCs that don't do AI things. Why aren't they selling? Oh, I wonder why.
Because no one's asking for them.
Right. So that's how they make these decisions. And, it can be, the biggest expenditures are the risk wafer buys when you're getting ready for production, right? The previous one will be your tape out when you're sending it off to the foundry and you've got to pay millions to go take the chip out and buy the wafers and do that kind of stuff. Before that, it's going to be like how long over time is it in the investment? So, the most expensive time to cancel a product is when you've got silicon back, you've ordered the wafers, and your software teams are starting to write code, and you say, oh man, this isn't going to go. We need to respin or cancel. And then there's a call of like, what are the commitments we've made? What's the fallback position? How much damage is this overall? That's the worst time to do it. So you try to do it ahead of that and move everybody over. But so it can be 6 months before launch, right? When you're taping out, and maybe 9 months these days because it takes 5 months to get through a fab for a design. So 9 months before a launch, is really your last go no go. But it could be 12 months before launch, 18 months. Typically, these product cycles and planning cycles are 5 years. So today, I think the leaders at these companies are sitting down and they're looking at, here's what we're doing in 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. They know what they're going to do till 2035, but their focus on resources and planning, they have 3-year plans on revenue, on OPEX to spend to achieve that revenue, capital investments, competitive updates. Those are all reviewed quarterly, and then decisions usually made. They can be, something unexpected happens, and it can be just 2 weeks after the big decision was made to continue forward. Oh, actually, we learned something. Quick meeting. All right, done. But typically, it's on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, and it's interesting you like walking through all of that, because I remember there are the rumors big RDNA 4 is canceled, and then I was told, yeah, it's happening, and I think it was like a month or two later, maybe, like someone I talked to that I get information from, we'll leave it at that, had a diagram of it, and later then I heard too, like AIBs, I don't think they have the diagram. I think AMD is like, this is the 12 chiplets, here's how it works. But I heard that AIBs were very disappointed when AMD canceled big RDNA 4, and that there was even some denial for a few months of like, well, maybe. And there probably was some truth to that. They were, you always have like a week to change your mind or something. But like, at first, my assumption was, and because some people told me, I don't know, it seemed really complicated, they were having issues. But then, again, without going into too much detail, I say that on a podcast, this happens all the time. Someone else at AMD reaches out to me and is like, no, here's my credentials, here's what I do, I'm the real deal. I don't like what you said on Broken Silicon, this is actually what happened. And this person told me, in addition to a lot of other interesting stuff, it would have worked. We had problems, but it just would have cost a lot of money. And we were making something with, I'm looking at the diagram right now again. That's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, at least 14 chiplets. And they said, we're sure it would have worked. It just would have taken this much time and this much money. And we just didn't think it was worth it. And I think there was also a little bit of this. Also, we realized, whether they call it UDNA or RDNA 5, however we were going to do chiplets the following gen, had far better results in simulations than what we were doing with this. And we're like, so are we really going to commit to like this 14 to 20 chiplet monster now that's costing more than we wanted?
Yeah.
Especially when RDNA 5 looks like it's going to do more with less. Like, why would we do that? And to me, that's what it seems like happened, And I think all too often people look at that and go, they gave up. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe they just have something better that's going to come sooner than you expect. And it just eventually, especially once the AI thing took off, they were like, there's no way, guys. Like, what? And yeah, like the AIBs probably said, yeah, this will be great. Can we sell it for 1,500? And they were like, maybe, or something,
Yeah. Price to performance. The AIBs are always keen and excited to go in and do new tech and new exciting things, especially big new tech. They can sell the heck out of that. Really, what you just described is, the ROI wasn't there, so they looked at it and said, how soon to the next one? Okay, we're executing really fast, so I don't think it's a bad thing to not really take a knee, but to really do that concept right and do it justice. as well as save the money. So, it's not like AMD haven't just done layoffs, etc., right? So they do very consciously realign their cost profile to their investments. They don't hold people around on things that they don't value, right? They want to make it the best return on the dollar.
Bfish writes in, do you have any insights into how AMD decides to forecast and allocate wafer supply across product lines? I've long assumed it was margin-based, but that desktop consumer could have higher volume and maybe make up for some lower margin, especially because they share chiplets with data center. But to be fair, that's just an assumption of mine. And I guess really getting at this question, we spitball like this all the time on Broken Silicon, me and my co-host, but like, how much of it is like, how often, like, because when I'm thinking of like, the PS5 Pro uses 4 nanometer. Zen 5 uses 4 nanometer. RDNA 4 uses 4 nanometer. Is there any insight you can give us into like a decision being made where it's like, nope, not using the wafer for that. Too bad. It's just not going to have that much return. Like, and how far in advance can that happen? Because I've heard, I don't know, I could be completely wrong. It's like, well, yes, you can share wafers between products, but there's a certain degree of like this setup actually has to make this product, even if it's 4 nanometer, because they prepared for that. And like, how easy is it to switch between things, and how much of it? Because I mean, man, when I look at them selling, for example, Zen 3 back in the day for $800 for what, 300 millimeters squared of silicon versus 528 millimeters squared, I think, of silicon for like a $1,000 or $650 6800 XT. I can see why it would be hard to justify those Radeon cards.
Yeah, I mean, not all wafers are equal. So they do get together and manage the capital investment, and the forecasting is intensive. There's a lot of supply demand planners at all these semiconductor companies. The binning and yields are a lot of the real reasons why you see launch strategies the way that they are. You have to hit the sales targets. So you get customer orders, so that really helps to firm up. If you've got a guaranteed sale, then that wafer, if the wafer's already sold,
so then, like if the margin's better for one product, but you've got guaranteed double the sales over here, you might still just go with that, which is probably why PlayStation, they still make so many of them.
Yeah, that's part of it. You've got to, there's customer agreements for supply. Like, hey, when you get big design wins, they put in contracts like, you can't short me. I get priority. If I don't, then there's a penalty, or we have to meet to explain and agree why there's no penalty, etc. So those things happen. Mostly, it's the component channel products that get they have the most amount of flexibility, right, of what you can shift demand around on to move products into different things, especially inside of desktop product lines. Like Ryzen is a really obvious example, right? You don't want to sell on day one 6 cores, which have got bits of silicon disabled, when you could sell 8 cores, right? So you start off selling all the 8 cores, and you start binning all the ones that have the natural fallout, and you collect a stock of them. And once you've got enough of those to fill in your Ryzen 5 definition, you start selling them. And then that's when you start binning and defeaturing by volume of sales instead of by natural fallout. So it's a little bit of margin, a little bit of product mix. It's also about, every number that every sales guy gives is broken down into products. So the guy that's managing 3 system integrators and a distributor in the Pacific Northwest is given a target for his sales, and he has to then allocate that across different products. He rolls that up and says, this is what I think it's going to do, and that's based on the history of what he's ever sold. Is to talk to his customer. How many do you want to buy? Can I talk you into this many, this price? He rolls that up, places his orders in, and then the supply managers, aggregate all of this. And it's an ongoing effort, because you've got to have the linearity, right? You don't want to try and do all of this stuff at the end of the quarter You're just hammering your inventory, your warehouse to ship a quarter's worth of products in 7 days. You want to have it nice and linear so that there's continuity of supply. Nobody's got large shipments that are very expensive. You're not drop shipping things or air shipping things when you could be putting it on a boat for cheaper and maintaining the market. So that wafer supply is usually forecast at the beginning of the year for the whole budget of like a financial year, and there'll be an upper and lower bound, but there'll be some accuracy to that, and it'll be based on years past, and they'll say this is what we need, and then it's regularly monitored as they go forward. Like I said, there's can be 5-6 months lead time on products, so if you're running hot, like you're really doing well in the first half of the year, you might say, all right, we're going to buy more wafers because we're selling them, right? What's the back half of the year look like? But then if somebody comes out and says, well, second half weakness in IoT markets, then you're going to be like, all right, let's dial that back a little bit. In May, let's not spend that money. Let's wait for the signal and start leaning out, because you don't want to have too much capital tied up in certain areas. You don't want your customers to have building inventory. You don't want to have aging inventory. You especially don't want to have returns as distributors say, I bought all this based on your sales forecast in January, and here we are in August, and I haven't even hit your March target yet. So you can have this back, right? Which is in a lot of their contracts, they're allowed to do this. There's sale or return. So all of that plays a really large way, and it doesn't just start with, I think we should sell more Ryzen 9s at high margin, right? It is a feedback loop and very closely monitored, and it's very complex. And I think that it will get better as we see agentic AI take on some of these things, because a lot of the forecasting is very manual, lots of data processing, gathering and stuff like that, and AI can help to gather that data and present views faster so that the human can make a decision on, okay, here's the trend lines and this is my estimations.
Well, and if we could remember some of that manual forecasting, we had a worldwide pandemic where everyone's like, well, everyone's going to be stuck inside. So certainly no one will want a laptop or a car when they can't fly, right? Like, and then they had to all overcorrect. And I actually want to ask this directly. Like, I'm thinking of like, well, your tenure at AMD, like, I would imagine, was it Kavari probably shared node with the Fury X, or so, like both 28 nanometer. And there's endless examples of Zen with the chiplets and GPUs, like IO die versus Polaris with Zen 2. How often did you see that, like something like, and I don't need specifics, I'm just curious, like, did it happen once a year? Have you seen it twice in your tenure at AMD of like, and again, I'm just giving an example. I'm not saying this literally happened, but like Zen 2 selling well, Polaris not, switch to IO die production. Like, how often did that actually happen? Because I think people think it happens all the time. I just don't know if it does.
Not as much as you think, because the upper and lower bounds and stuff are set to help manage this. Also, because not every transistor is the same, right? So where a graphics card may be using the high power version of the process, the CPU, we might be using the low power, and the IO die might be using the ultra low power, right? The LPP or something like that version. And so you can't just say like, hey, I bought all these wafers at 28 nanometer, and I'm not going to build with my Fury X's, I'm going to build IO dies, because they're not the same line, they're not the same wafer. If you're early enough, you can say, I forecasted to buy X amount of wafers from you, I want to change my mix, and I can go do that. But that's, obviously long lead time stuff. I can't do it inside of a quarter. I can do it for like a 6-month view. So I think there is some of that goes on. They do try to reshape those supply agreements, the purchasing blends and stuff. Obviously, I do remember when we were putting together the forecast on AM4, and we were saying like, hey, for chipsets. So we've got 2 chipsets. We've got the X370, the B350. They're both promontories. And then we've got the A320. And then we've got these funny little basically enabler chipsets that never went into the come out into the market of DIY. They went just to the OEMs. They would just say, hey, because they were just, you got no extra I/O. They were just literally, hey, I'm an authentic AMD motherboard. You can work. And, the margin on those was like 90% because they were $1 and they cost, nothing to make. And so the planners came to us and to be like, why are you so heavy on these expensive chipsets that are low margin? Why don't you just sell more of these little ones? Can't you price them up or something and just do more volume there? And we had to sit down and say, well, look, from a product perspective, right, it's missing all of these things, and these are the core requirements for our thing. And they're like, oh, okay. I saw the margin and I really liked it, so I wanted to sell more of those. So you do get that kind of conversation happening. Not everybody in these companies is a deeply experienced DIY PC builder that has the heritage of, from the Athlon days to Athlon XP through to now, and understand, what is a chipset, what is a motherboard. A lot of these guys have no idea. They're just really focused on supply demand planning and understanding the lead times and getting those things put together. So you do get, I remember, I think one time, I remember more often than not that, hey, we need to buy more wafers. Can you sell more stuff? Can we stuff more into the channel? Versus, hey, we've got incredible demand on this product over here and we want to starve you, right? I remember it more as the other way around of like, pick up the bag, right? You've got to deliver and save us all. But that's, I'm sure it's different now. So I think probably they have conversations where like we're seeing unprecedented epic demand. We need the wafers. You're going to short your supply on desktop. Sorry, it is what it is. And because, like I said before, there's a fiduciary responsibility to maximize profit on returns on investment. So if you've got a choice of selling 10 things at high margin and 20 things at low margin, you're going to pick the bigger pile of dollars. It's only if you can look everybody in the eye and say like, oh, yeah, it was today's gain, but tomorrow's loss because I'd lose that customer permanently. And then they did the X amount over time. So that was usually how the conversations went. So there wasn't a huge amount of back and forth because relationships matter, right? You can't just go to everything into a bid situation.
You can't go to HP and be like, sorry, we're not making these GPUs you ordered because Ryzen's so profitable.
Right.
Like, you had a contract. Yeah, it feels like you're saying you've seen it happen where they've switched allocation, but for the most part, it's just make less or make less or make more of something because we're forecasting it, not make more of this and make less of that at the same time. All right. Well, so basically, the final thing I want to ask you about. I mean, we pretty much danced around this company the entire time, but I want to ask very directly: Nvidia. Right now, it seems like Nvidia is poised to launch a very expensive 5090 and 5080 in January after announcing them at CES. How do you see Blackwell paying out? How do you see Nvidia's place in the gaming market right now? And is there anything you would change from your perspective in how Nvidia conducts themselves? Like, should they still be aggressively trying to have some good $400 card? Does it make sense they're going? I mean, it sounds like the 5070 is going to be $600 to $700. Is there anything you would change in how they're doing, and how do you see their place in the market?
I mean, they're the champs. They have the responsibility to maximize the ROI. I think that if you've got Jensen being wined and dined by Elon and others all at the same meeting, the people that would never go and he's selling his GPUs with sealed bids over dinners, then I think there's a credible argument to be made that every gaming GPU he put into the market where he makes $500 could have been a $40,000 platform where he made $10,000. So, not to say, oh, good guy, Nvidia, thanks so much, but appreciate I'm just saying that they're still treating the gaming market
they could be greedier.
They could be greedier. They're still taking it seriously, still investing. They haven't forgotten where they came from. They haven't forgotten who gave them the momentum to start, right, from the very first Reva days and all going forward. Carmack just wrote a great little article about how Nvidia changed the gaming market by taking on driver development themselves and making it better and higher quality and simpler to work with, so that games could run better. So I think that's still inside of them. Obviously, I want lower prices. I'm not excited about any $600-700 component. And even as I say here, sitting next to my 3990X Threadripper system, right?
Sure.
But there's a reason why it hasn't been upgraded in a few years, right? It's because
Yep.
I gotta wait now, right? So I think the real gamer battle is going to be down in the sub $700 price point. It's $500 and lower. Everybody, everybody's feeling the pain of inflation, of the market forces, of games getting more expensive. So, is 50 series, 70 class GPUs and above going to be professional? They're really for people who have a business use for them. You could make the case that it's for pro gamers, ultra enthusiasts.
I was going to say, I don't know if you saw my video I put out today, but I was sent a document that I'm not sharing for obvious reasons that said that Nvidia is directly telling retailers right now that anything set above the 70 Ti should be marketed as professional at places like Micro Center and Best Buy.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if they were to do that, it would be for two reasons. Number one, it's get on the front foot to manage the less informed buyers, right? Little Johnny says, "Hey, Mom, I need the new Nvidia card for Fortnite," and she goes to Micro Center, so they don't try and sell her $1,000 GPU. They sell her something, less. And she doesn't come back and being like, why is it this much? What is the problem? Those price points set expectations in terms of support and in terms of what they can do, right? The general public, the general gamers don't. There's a mismatch of expectations. Calling it a professional card, saying, yeah, it can game, but it's really if you're intensively using photo editing, video editing, you're content creating with AI, you're making money off of this thing. Is that to sound like you? Is this a family PC that everybody's using and making? No. It's just a kid game. All right, don't buy this, buy that. Unless, of course, he's already a streamer, and in which case he's probably already got the revenue stream to go buy 4090s and whatever, etc. by himself. So I think it's defensive maneuvering. The other part of it would be, hey, that's maybe managing some supply, and it's a way to prioritize the supply too. Like they're going to have less cards, maybe. I don't know. I think they'll have a healthy supply, but they're also giving a reason for their planners to want to respond to this. I'm like, hey, when you sell these 70s and you give them to Micro Center, it's not just kids playing video games, right? It's people coming in to buy professional cars to enable their business. This is actual revenue that we want. We want to drive mindshare here. We want to continue to have people buying NVIDIA cards for professional products where, they're investing in this studio driver, etc. Right? Because that's not something you see too much on the AMD side, right? There's gamer drivers,
not
and
as
professional
often releases.
drivers.
No,
right? No, they're really focused on it's an Adobe certified driver, whereas the creator driver on NVIDIA is like, hey, you've got a consumer card, and it's focused on stability and enabling features in Premiere Pro and stuff like that. But I think that segmentation is increasing, and I think that's partly to help them manage allocation with add-in boards as well, the AIBs, because some of those companies are pure gaming companies, and when they position it as a professional card, they're going to say, well, look, I'm prioritizing my supply on the companies that serve both of these markets, professional and gamer. Your company branding is purely gamer. You only talk to them. You talk about esports cafes. You talk about tournaments. You don't talk about AI and video creation, all these other things that I'm pivoting into. When you come and join with me in that marketing, then the supply can ease up. But it's they're giving themselves tools to manage expectations, not just with consumers, but with distributors, with partners, with resellers, and with builders themselves.
So I wonder what you think about this idea. It's an idea I've brought up before, but It feels sometimes to me like Nvidia competes. Well, they're certainly competing in GPU, but they go balls to the walls when they want to. And I think that Nvidia saw the 290X, for example, beat the Titan, and then and the 7970 before that really, kind of almost matched their Titan as well once it matured with drivers. And they went, okay, AMD can compete if we just sit around. And then that's when they just, boom, went for it with Maxwell. More aggressive pricing. They accelerated the release on 28 nanometer. I mean, they just went for it. And that's, in my opinion, really when they crushed AMD is Maxwell. They just kept hammering with, they could have charged 800 for the 1080. If they charged 700, then 500, and the 1080 Ti could have been 1,000. They made it so they didn't let up. They didn't let AMD up for air for a while there. And they've been leaving them up for air lately. I think they've been leaving some room, but I wonder what you think about this idea of like, there is actually an opportunity here that Jensen's probably okay with. Like, I think I almost get the feeling that Jensen right now with gaming is like, hey, look, AMD, if you want to kill yourself to take 20% GPU market share and get to 40% or something, go for it, because we're making so much more money in AI. And at the same time, because AMD's not a $1 trillion company yet, I don't know, maybe, what's a metaphor I could make? Like, it might not be a lobster dinner, but steak to someone who eats chicken every day might be lobster or something, so I wonder what you think about like this actually with RDNA 4 is an opportunity, and AMD should not make it 600. They should make it 500 because actually NVIDIA's fine with that this year. Do you think that's a good argument, or do you still think it's just same old? Not really. They should just stick with trying to do everything they're doing everywhere and do only what they have to do.
Yeah. That's the difference between a GPU first company and a CPU first company, right? So Nvidia, Maxwell, they invested heavily. That's coincidentally also when Google came to them and said, hey, build me a tensor unit. I want to do AI. I need hardware. I can't build it. You're the only guys that can, right? And so how did Maxwell come out as so good? Well, it's because they baked in from day one, when they went to concept, a customer saying, I need this, and I'm going to pay this for it. And they went, okay. So now we can do all the things that we were previously hesitant about because we've got that locked in, right? That confidence paid off over a decade like we've never seen, right? As fantastic as the AMD turnaround and rise has been, Nvidia just off, they're the Millennium Falcon to whatever kind of Corellian freighter AMD is, right? So just they for a few years there where they were so dependent on gaming revenue, then they absolutely went for ground and pound, just no mercy, no quarter, every single launch, delivering execution and covering all the bases. Now that ground and pound has shifted to data center, then they are not focused so much right there. But I think the people at Nvidia still have that mentality. A lot of those guys rolling out, and there's new people coming in, but I think there's still that belief that they want to win there. So when AMD, I think that if AMD says, you know what, let's go hard and do $500 graphics cards, I don't think Nvidia will chase them. They'll say, we're in the headlines. We're the ones everyone's talking about every day. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday is going to work for us. And I'm already taking the margin hit to go enable the GPU market instead of selling everything into data center. Why would I take more of a margin hit for them to get 5 points, right? Because I think the latest stats was like 90% GPU share for NVIDIA now. It's incredible.
Yeah, it depends how you count
dominance.
it. I mean, in some it depends on the market, and I mean, here in China, it's like 95,
right?
But
right. So depending on how you count it, where you look, but let's be generous and say AMD has 15 and the other 85 is NVIDIA. If AMD goes to 25, fantastic, nearly doubling their market share. What a win for them. Did NVIDIA feel it? Right? Well,
it seems like you think no. It seems like you think AMD does have an opening because of how much NVIDIA doesn't care anymore.
I guess what I'm reacting to, I think they care, but it doesn't raise to the level of reacting about it. It's like, a mosquito bites you. Do you slap yourself harder than the mosquito bite was, or do you just flick it off? So it is going to be interesting to see and how it's portrayed. I think that the influencers and media are going to have a portion in this, but like, do you tank your margin on your GPU products that could have been AI just to hold 5 points of market share to combat some headlines, or do you just sit back and say, but I sold more in a quarter than these companies that compete with me do in a year?
Mm-hmm.
Right, at higher margin, and I'm out of supply. Like, which is a better response and a story to everybody that they care about? So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But the way that there's two ways AMD can play that, right? Is, well, if Nvidia don't care, then I can price high because it doesn't matter what I do.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to
Which I'm
get
not
any.
saying I'm sure they'll do 500.
Right.
I think 600 is very likely for AMD.
Right. I mean, if the way I would approach this is I would come in with a solid price performance improvement from the previous generation. Make it look that every frame that you get is 10%, 15% lower price than what you got from the previous gen of AMD, and is competitive with Nvidia. Maybe not more expensive, but 2-3% right in there, and then watch what happens in the market and be ready to pull the lever to pull
if you
it
see
down.
a real opening.
If you see a real opening, like, hey, you're selling a bunch of them, leave it alone. If the sales are kind of slow or start rolling off, then okay, let's move with it and continue to drive it. And definitely be asking your product team, can you give me a 8850, right, in 6 months' time?
If we need to.
Right, so that I can bring that in at my original price point and push the 8800 down even more, right? Just do that price point, replace and drop and everything else, and just push that down. So there's a number of strategies that they can employ here. We'll see what they want to do. I think they're serious about wanting to take share back. The perception was when Intel launched their GPUs, that there really wasn't NVIDIA fans and AMD fans. There were NVIDIA people and not NVIDIA people, because the only person who lost share were AMD. So AMD now have to go counter that and say, whoa, no, actually, we're really good at gaming. We've got these great GPUs. We've got all this fan base. Radeon is everywhere. And we're going to go win the hearts and minds of that community and show it off with the 8800 XT or whatever it's called.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a couple things. Like, number one, it's like, it's really comes down. I really think even at $500, from what I've heard, the die isn't very big anyways. Like, they can probably still make good margin. And the question will become, is it going to be good at good price performance at 600? Or actually, is there that extra margin where at $500, actually, we're still making good margin? So let's go for the kill. What I would say to AMD, I'm sure they're thinking about this, is if you think you have a kill on your hands here, be ready for the follow-up, because my suspicion is Jensen wouldn't care for one generation. I mean, he doesn't. I mean, he's got AI. It doesn't matter. He will care the next gen. There will be another Maxwell moment if he thinks he needs it to just regain the market share. So I would say if AMD... And I think this is something I kind of hear behind the scenes, is AMD's a little scared to go for 20, 30% market share or more, because they know once they go for that, the gloves come off again, because Jensen does not like losing. So I would say to AMD, if you're going to go for it, make sure UDNA is also looking good, because it's going to need to really try to, harness what you've built. And I think it was such a disappointment that like RDNA 1 was surprisingly very good, very competitive for, I think, what expectations were. RDNA 2, a lot of people think was just better than Ampere. It just didn't have the production to take market share. And then RDNA 3 fumbled. It's not terrible, but it fumbled. And I think it's like, well, now you got to start over again. because you need 3 gens in a row of just feeling like you're at the same level before I think you can really take mind share. And so I don't know. I think a lot of it would also come down to is like AMD. Are you ready to really go for it as well? And I think that's what we're going to learn is when we see what they do.
Oh, I don't know. I had a pretty visceral reaction to you saying they were afraid to go for it because the guys that I saddled up and rode into battle with Ryzen against Intel, nah, we weren't.
But those are different teams, to be fair.
I don't know how much they're different now. I would do some poking around.
So you think they're out? You think they're out for blood then?
I think that there's some quiet confidence. Jack Hune's running that now across client and graphics. I would say they're strapping up the gloves and ready to ride in. I definitely don't think they're afraid. I will say that, maybe what's a winning scenario or outcome is not what the enthusiast market think it is, right? If you just put together a plan and you say we're going to do conservatively this and aggressively this is our target market for market share at a price point over a number of units in a given amount of time, and you deliver more than that, you beat every metric, then you can't call that failure, even if you're at, say, 18% of the GPU market, right? That's certainly the case. Remember, we started from AMD Ryzen started from like 5%,
yeah,
right? When we got to 10, trumpets everywhere, but 10%, really? You think that's great? It really depends on your vantage point. If the plan was to get from 5% to 7% in a generation and you deliver 10%, you're heroes. You're awesome. You're wonderful because you beat the plan and you delivered on the commitments and everybody outperformed. So it really depends on what are they trying to do with the 88 with this new card. How are they trying to go to? It sounds to me like they're going after the heart of the market. That sounds like an aggressive strategy. How will they get there? I don't think they're going to be shy. I think they're going to come in hard and fast. But I think we're going to see the standard intro pricing. Maybe it's a little high and dial it in. And go from there. It used to be we could go to the media and test price points and stuff, but now everybody just puts that straight out on the web. You just have to go with what you got and go from there.
I can't think of a better way to end this podcast, so I think I'm going to end it right there, actually. But like I always say to my guests, before I let you go, of course, thank you for coming on, but please, anything you would like to plug? There's been things before. Is there anything now?
No, I'm excited to start my new role with MIPS in the coming days and help them with their product strategy and marketing strategy to help build the next generation of AI accelerators and data intensive processes with the custom silicon ecosystem. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with all the CES announcements around client gaming technology and AI in the client space. I think next year is going to be a really, really pivotal year for all these technology bets to pay off. So I think it's a great time to be a gaming enthusiast. I was thinking through earlier, like the technology we have available today, the performance, the features, just absolutely fantastic choices compared to what it was 20 years ago. It's unrecognizable. So when we're talking about, is it really possible for Intel to turn it around? AMD did it. Can Nvidia hold off the AMD attack on GPU? Intel couldn't on the CPU side. But there's so many unknowns, uncertainties out there. So I'm thankful for you guys for appreciating having me come back on. Great questions. Thanks so much to all of you who listen, and thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just add on to I do think people need to take a step back every now and then and go. I mean, I remember when 30 frames per second average was okay, and the 4870 review, I'm pretty sure, was those reviews were well, it's 30 on average. That means everybody was dropping at 24 frames per second sometimes. And then it went to 60 and even 1080 reviews. Look it up, 4K, 60 average. They were fine with it dropping to 48 frames. And now people are complaining if it's not locked at 144 or higher. And even consoles are running some games at 120 hertz. And this is where people jump in. Oh, not that many games. Yeah, but the fact that a console's running any game at 120 hertz is such a far cry from where we were 10 years ago. It's just, I don't know. Gaming's really never been better, especially in terms of performance. But yes,
Agreed.
Thank you for coming on again, James Breyer. Everybody, you can find him in the description as well if you want to see what he's doing. And thank you for watching, everybody. Thank you for listening. Remember, subscribe to Moore's Law Dead on YouTube. Support us on Patreon. And have a good week, everybody. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugada as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guests questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit. And give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Bedlin, Drita Full, ZGIS, Daniel D, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, Daniel High, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, SNES Chalmers, Jerome Ferrier, Valcom Alev, Toka, Jensen Wang, Gregory Sacker, Sarcastro, Chris Strick, Evan Dingle, Compress AI Blocks, 3S Boy 08, Hal Booma, Shredbird, Holden Mobley, Samuel Molas, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Jonathan, Chrysantine, Franco Frederic, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Nithra Zink, Mead and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cakes, Gamers Unite, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, Aishan, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Jamie Witters, Cole Atta, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Pell, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Tika Autumn, Mai Sharona, Winwang, Winstar, Corey Leonard, James I, Raider, Little Germany, JSMMH, Shane, Milton, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Dave Schultz, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bussell, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jansen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Slushbot, Him Segung, Tails2299, Mealval, Verga, Sisyphos7771, The Forbidden Juice, Brian Wright, RB Racer, AC, Alex Vega, Dr. J Mad, Free D, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Crystal Joe, Elbergun, Kikum, Solarized 80, Jeffrey Gentleman, Matthew Marlowe, Brian P, Sprutnik, Hudat42, Viguf, Higuk, Cornster 671, Penta Winta, Hal Richard, Angel of Cake, John Wick Boomstick, Omega Doge, Mr. Tiger, Porcelain Oats, Curry King 3, Nick, Suzmania, Sakosha, Amond, Vactura, State Farm Snake, and Rye Hill Chi Bowls. And of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.